Brilliant. So we already have some people joining us. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes as people join, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll get started. We've got quite a few people joined already. As more people join, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box at the bottom. We are going to have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have any specific questions as we go through the webinar, please add them in the Q&A box, and you can also upvote other people's questions. But if it's to introduce yourself or to bring anything else up, you can pop it in the chat. So welcome to this webinar on supporting the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill, and particularly on some ideas of how to engage your MP. I'm going to hand over to Marta from Parents for Future to introduce Parents for Future and the bill, and then we'll come to the training after that. Okay, Marta.
Thank you, Lizzie. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I think many people on this training are probably familiar with Parents for Future, but for those who are not, please allow me a few minutes to kind of introduce us. We are a global grassroots movement of parents, grandparents, carers, basically adults who are concerned about the state of the world that we may leave for the future generations. We are predominantly focused on the climate activism. However, more and more often we get involved in projects which go beyond climate, which touch on, you know, environmental issues, biodiversity, but also social or racial issues. And I guess it's pretty inevitable because, you know, we are facing the problems and issues that are very complex and interlinked, and we cannot simply work in those little silos. We have to apply systemic thinking and systemic solutions to those complex problems. And I think that brings me nicely to the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill, which is exactly that kind of systemic solution. And the bill has been introduced in the Parliament by Lord John Bird and in the House of Lords, and by Caroline Lucas in the House of Commons at the beginning of this year. And the bill aims to protect future generations from the short-termism of the politics today. It specifies that the government and public bodies need to act in a manner that ensures the needs of future people, the needs of present people are met without compromising the needs of future people, right? Or rather their ability to meet their needs. And I think Jane Davidson, during our Wednesday webinar, which I think some of the people in the audience today have attended, she said that the bill brings moral values to the world of politics. And I felt that was really nicely put. Just to give you a more practical, I guess, example of how this bill would have worked if it was already implemented. the government would be legally bound to introduce economic recovery measures from COVID-19 that are at the same time tackling climate emergency and social issues. Or the Bank of England would be held to account for bailing out polluting companies without any strings attached, as it does today, basically. So this is why we feel here at Parents for Future that this bill is very important. It's as I said, it adds that long-term dimension, the purpose and the moral compass to our politics, to the political system that we have. And as it is a private member bill, it will obviously need lots of time and lots of support of as many MPs as it is possible across the parliamentary spectrum. So the campaign that we've just launched basically last week focuses on engaging people to lobby their MPs and lobby them ahead of the second reading, which is on the 22nd of January next year. So I'm really happy that Hope for the Future agreed to co-host this training and to offer their expertise and the best advice on how to do that in the most effective way. Thank you.
Thanks, Marta. So I think we're going to share some slides now. Yeah. So that's great. Thanks, Helena. So yeah, we're from Hope for the Future. My name's Lizzie and my colleague Helena is going to talk to you as well today. We are a climate change communications charity. We're non-partisan. We work with constituents and MPs across the political spectrum to try and get people having conversations with their MPs and their councillors about climate change. And we have a lot of experience of this. The charity's about 5 years old. And so today we're going to talk you through some of the ways that we think you can get the most from meeting with your MP. And we've tried to focus this around the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill, but it applies to lots of other aspects of climate change communication. So you can kind of take from that what is most relevant for you. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Helena to start.
Thanks, Lizzie. Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Helena, and as you can see on the screen now, I'm a Wellbeing Assistant here at Hope for the Future. It's great to be with you all today. So to begin our training this afternoon, I think I want to start with this quote. And now this is from an anthropologist called Emma Crew, and she spent many years in the House of Commons doing research among MPs and the staff in the House of Parliament to really find out kind of what the relationships are between those MPs and what makes those relationships and collaboration between MPs tick. And this is, I think, a really important quote for us to start with, especially when we're thinking about campaigning and engaging with MPs in what feels often like a very adversarial politics and a very kind of defensive and conflict-filled political system, as the media often portrays it. So she says, cross-party alliances are becoming more common, and the most significant secret at the heart of Parliament is that political work is less antagonistic than it appears. So this really sort of forms the foundation of what here at Hope for the Future we are all about, and that is helping you have effective conversations and communicate your concern about climate change effectively with your MP. And we find that, as Lizzie says, we've been doing this for many years now, and the most effective way to do this is to communicate with empathy and not sort of play into that adversarial defensive politics that we so often see in the media and on our news screens. So to start with, I think it's good to put ourselves in the shoes of our MP and kind of, find out a little bit more about them and what their job involves. So being an MP is an incredibly high profile job. It's also got very heavy time restraints. So an MP would be expected to be in Westminster. Obviously at the moment this is slightly different with COVID, but In fact, it makes it more complicated and even stronger time restraints on their time. So they'll be in Parliament for 5 days a week, or 4 or 5 days a week, and then 2 days in the constituency, and they might get a day off in there as well. So it's high responsibility, high profile, and a lot to be doing all the time. Secondly, MPs are generalists, so they'll often have very broad knowledge, but kind of lack detail in their understanding of issues. So this might mean that an MP feels quite insecure about the details of something you're discussing with them. So that's something to bear in mind. Similarly, there are limits on what an MP as a kind of local representative of a specifically bounded constituency can actually have power in actioning. So tackling global issues like climate change can be a difficult one for MPs to feel like they have power in. Also, an MP might be constrained by the party line. So this could be because they're a minister. Ministers can't actually vote against their party, or they get fired, they lose their position. So that's also something to bear in mind with what role your MP has. And also, many MPs have quite bad experiences with campaigners in the past. Not really from the fault of the campaigner, just again, that kind of adversarial conflict that is so common amongst our political system. So they might have quite a poor perception of campaigners. So that's also something to kind of have in the back of your mind when you're preparing. And finally, career demands. I think we can probably all relate to the kind of demands of a job and balancing that with family and all of those things. So now that we've sort of put ourselves in our MP's shoes, I want to get us to think a little bit about the behaviours that we might see when talking to an MP. Perhaps you might have experience of doing this already, having met with an MP or written to them before and kind of come up against some of these defensive responses. So some of these behaviours might be holding the party line. So this is where an MP would sort of not portray any of their personal opinions on something and just hold on to what their party says and not give you any more information than that. You also might experience them controlling a conversation, not really giving you a chance to get a word in edgeways, or telling you about the wonderful things that they've done on another issue. So that can be frustrating. You may also have experienced inattention from your MP. We've certainly been in meetings where MPs have been on their phone, or they've told their assistant to go buy some milk, sort of very, what feels quite rude behaviour, but actually it's a kind of defence, a sort of defence mechanism. They might also refuse concrete answers or sort of sweet talk you and say, oh, I'm absolutely willing to consider that topic, but not actually give you an agreement to do something about it. They also might, sort of agree with everything you say all the right things, but then not come to a concrete conclusion and an action that they will be taking forward. And finally, they may feign surprise or say that they don't have any power to do anything about the issue that you're talking to them about. So it's not just defensive behaviours from the MP that that may happen. We also have defensive behaviours from us as campaigners, and so these behaviours may be in response to what the MP is doing, or they may be because of past experience you have, or just your frustration at your disagreements with how your MP votes or what their politics is. So it's important to kind of shine that lens on ourselves as well. So some of them here on the screen, we've got showing irritation or being dismissive or cynical of what your MP is saying in your meeting, or kind of deliberately exposing a gap in their knowledge. As I said before, MPs are generalists, so there may well be gaps in their knowledge, and deliberately exposing that as a sort of tactic of conflict is never helpful in communicating. similar to that, honing in on a controversial issue, that has a similar response often. Attacking an MP's party is another one that doesn't really help anyone in terms of building a relationship, or treating an MP as a means to an end. So that might be asking them to organise an event or something rather than inviting them to an event that you were organising. Yeah, and finally, controlling the conversation. MPs can do it, we can do it too. And what we're trying to have here is a conversation and a discussion, and not a one-sided rant, as hard as that may be sometimes. So all of this isn't to say that we're suggesting you sort of set aside the things you disagree with your MP on. This is about communicating effectively, and this understanding of defensive behaviours and the harm that they cause to our communication all comes from the work of Marshall Rosenberg. So nonviolent communication is something that we really base our training on, and what we're going to be sort of talking you through the practice of today. So nonviolent communication is, it works on the assumption that all human beings have the capacity for compassion and empathy, and that people resort to those harmful or defensive behaviours towards others when they don't recognise that there's actually much more effective strategies of meeting their needs. So we're talking here about finding an understanding and a connection with someone to sort of get past your conflict with them. So these language and communication skills in action are a sort of process of moving away from some things and towards others. So what we have on the screen here are those things that you're trying to move away from and towards. We're trying to move away from those moralistic judgments and comparisons where we might say or think that someone is sort of so selfish and only thinking of themselves, or that they don't care about it as much as we do, so that we sort of morally judge them for that. And then that results in us abdicating responsibility for our reactions and behaviours to that. So we might be thinking, I did it because I had to, or so-and-so told me to do that, or you made me feel a certain way, so I acted like this. And all of these things then result in us making demands of someone. So a demand is, the only response you can have to a demand is yes or no. There's no sort of grey area for conversation and dialogue and compromise to come to sort of some common ground and agreement. So that's what we're trying to move away from. And instead, we're trying to move towards making observations, expressing our feelings about an issue, owning our own actions and encouraging the other person to do the same, and ultimately acknowledging our needs. And this results in us making requests rather than demands. So requests have that grey area in there where you can find some common ground. So to give you an example of what this might sound like, because I'm aware this is quite sort of theoretical, you might, if you were not using NVC, you might say, you don't care about anyone but yourself. Well, that might be how you're feeling about your MP's actions. But instead, a way to express that much more constructively, you could say, I see that you voted against a pay rise for NHS staff, and I'm trying to understand this, and I feel kind of sad and confused at the fact that you voted that way, because I really value fairness and appreciation. So would you be willing to explain why you made that decision? So you see the difference there. It's much more expressing of your own feelings and owning of your own actions, and ultimately making a request that kind of recognises the other person's agency in that decision that they made. So I'm aware that was a lot of information. So just as a quick pause before I pass back to Lizzie, this is a case study of an MP called Gary Streeter, who was engaged with by some of his constituents as part of a mass lobby in 2019. And he wrote this on his blog about how the constituents that he spoke with really made him take climate change much more seriously, because they weren't coming at him in an adversarial way. They had a conversation with him, and they showed him how passionate they were about the issue in a way that invited him to be part of that too. So yeah, I guess this is just before we go into the more of the details of our training, to say that this does really work, this method, and we've seen some really great results of MPs really starting to take climate change more seriously and to take action. So now I'm going to pass back to Lizzie, and she's going to take us through our relationship-based approach.
Okay, yeah, so as we're going through, it's worth having some of that NVC ideas in the back of your mind, and you'll see how it comes out in what we advise people to do to work with their MP. So we've slimmed this down to fit into the time so that we can fit in lots of questions and answers, but it's worth saying that at this point that all of this work we can help you directly with. So if it's something you want to take forward in meeting with your MP, just get in touch with us, and we can do some more of this training around MVC with you, with your Parents for Future group, for example, and you don't have to suddenly know how to do this at the end of a half-an-hour training. We can provide more help. So yeah, so the first thing that we recommend when you're thinking about meeting with your MP is to do some research, and actually we also recommend that you let us do this for you. So the first thing to do would be to contact us and ask for a tailored lobbying strategy. So these are kind of 4-page-ish documents that our research team put together, and they include lots of information on your MP and your MP's political activity related to the issue that you're interested in. So if you write to us saying, I'm from Parents for Future and I'm interested in the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill, and I live in this constituency, we can make a document for you that has all that research on your MP that would suggest where you might look for these areas of common ground, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. So that's the first thing to sort of say, is you don't necessarily have to do all the research yourself. We can help you with that. But having a bit of background on your MP can help you to think about how they might feel. And going into your meeting, this is really important to have a bit of a sense of whether they might be on board with what you're saying, they might be in total agreement, or they may well be totally opposed, but more likely than not, they'll be somewhere in the middle. And I'm just going to not dwell on this graphic for too long, but we are going to come back to it. So just having in the back of your mind where your MP might sit on that scale can be really useful for finding common ground. And to do this, it can be useful also to think about, sorry, Helena, about the values that your MP has. So these can be party values, and party values will be important to your MP because they sit within a party and they have a responsibility to their party. So Conservatives tend to value this individual aspiration and personal aspiration, while Labour will generally value state protection of the vulnerable, while the Liberal Democrats will be more focused on the ideas of equality and human rights. And while we're on this slide, I'm just going to highlight that, the majority of MPs in the UK are around the centre right, and that there can be some misconception of what their values might be. So values that are important to people around the centre right are things like aspiring to enjoyment and happiness and having a good life, security, preserving traditions and landscapes, which can be really important when we're talking about climate change, and finding a framing that works for people on the centre right. Ideas of valuing community and particularly national identity, and also group loyalty. And things that are definitely not centre-right values and would not appeal to a centre-right politician, for example, are these grand theories and isms, radical change and using radical language, social justice and equality as theories, and also ideas of protest and disrespect for authority. So by having a conversation with your MP as a constituent, for some MPs that can be in itself much more effective than any protest, just because they don't, the idea of a protest doesn't align with their values. So even just trying to have a conversation in itself can be much more effective with some MPs than other forms of campaign or political action. So it's also worth thinking about the fact that you're talking to someone who has chosen to become an MP. So that in itself can tell you a little bit about their personal values. So they've committed to doing this role, and so they therefore are valuing public service. MPs also tend to value recognition and respect, whether that's of their role or of authority, but also just of other people. They tend to be ambitious people, and they tend to have very positive, big picture visions, and will value you talking to them in a way that appeals to that big picture vision. And MPs also really value visible legacies, and kind of, I think this was touched on a little bit in your previous webinar about the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill, is this idea that a lot of them have children or grandchildren, or they're part of a community, they're part of a family, and they care how their work will affect those people. So appealing to this idea of a legacy can be really powerful. So once you've had a think about what their values might be, and actually sometimes it can be really useful to reflect on your own values and what you value, you can start to look for some overlap between those two things. So this is an example that we've put together from an MP called Alexander Stafford. So we've worked with him quite a lot over the past year. He was newly elected last year. He's a Conservative MP in Rother Valley, which was previously a Labour constituency and had been for quite a long time. So some of what we might think of as his agenda going into his new role were things like trying to build his name up both in Parliament and within his constituency, and kind of maybe try to prove himself a little bit in this new as a new Conservative MP. He wanted to show that he was concerned about local areas. That came through very strongly in his election campaign, and he wanted to really champion his local area. And the campaigners that we were working with obviously wanted to tackle climate change. They wanted to do this by challenging government policy and being able to empower their own MP to take some action and to contribute to the UK taking action. And they also wanted to build community support for climate action within their constituency. So things that came out of us working with them to find some common ground with Alexander Stafford were looking at how regional investment in their constituency in Rother Valley could contribute to providing new green jobs and improving investment in the area. And that was done through this Northern Powerhouse idea that Alexander himself was quite interested in. They also got him to engage on climate change around community energy provision and sort of fuel security coming through that. And also because Rother Valley is an area that floods badly and quite frequently, they were able to engage him on the links between climate change and flooding, and he's since been very vocal on that in Parliament on the national stage. So that's just one example of how you might go about trying to find some common ground to talk about with your MP. But once you've identified that common ground, you need to sort of plan your agenda for your meeting, or for what you want to get out of your meeting with your MP. And to do that, we use this acronym, which is used a lot. I'm sure many of you will have seen it before, things like job interviews. And it's really a way of making sure that you are asking for something that can be done and that is going to have an outcome. So there's no point going into the meeting without asking for something. Your MP wants to deliver for you, but they can't if you don't tell them what you want. So I've got this quote from an anonymous MP actually, who was interviewed by Rebecca Willis, who does a lot of research on why it's difficult for politicians to engage on climate change. And this MP said, politicians like to have campaigns they can win. And you can't say, I've campaigned to stop climate change and now climate change is fixed and I've delivered for you. So when we talk about a smart ask, we're kind of saying you need to be more specific than I want to stop climate change or I want to protect future generations. You need to think about what it is that your MP could do to contribute to that ultimate aim. So what you ask needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and timely. And this is where Hope for the Future can help. Our research team have like loads of experience of actions that your MP could do. And then our lobbying team have lots of experience of like how to go about asking for that. So definitely use us. But we've compiled a few that we think might be relevant to the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill in general. And it's worth saying here again that it's going to depend if your MP happens to be a minister or not, because ministers are a little bit more limited in what they can do. So first I'll explain, like, if your MP is a minister, you can do things like, say they're not really on board with what you've been talking about and they seem a bit resistant, and maybe a 1 or a 2 on this scale, you can still ask them to pass on a letter to the minister that's most relevant to what you're talking about. And they kind of have to do this, so it's not a big ask. If they seem more amenable to what you've been talking about, they seem a bit more on the same page as you, say a 3 or 4 maybe on this scale, then you could ask them to set up a meeting for you, and they would attend that meeting with the relevant minister. And that can be a really, really good way to get access to a minister that's most relevant to your goal. But if they're a minister themselves, they can't necessarily do loads of other things for you. Whereas if your MP is either a Conservative backbencher or not in the Conservative governing party, then there's a few more things you can ask. So if they are a 1 or a 2 on this scale, sort of not really on board with what you're saying, you can ask them to submit a written question to the government. And that's, again, quite an easy ask for them. If they're further up the scale, seem quite on board with what you're saying and want to do maybe a bit more amenable to doing something more, then you can ask them to submit oral questions to the government, and that happens. Those questions will go on the record and the government will have to produce a response. In terms of the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill, there's some really easy asks that any politician could commit to, and you could ask kind of any politician to do. So firstly, there's asking them to join the all-party parliamentary group on future generations. And I think that's something that Parents for Future have been suggesting people do on the website. So that's one that anyone can ask their MP to do. And then there's also Today for Tomorrow, who are running the campaign around the bill. In January, they're going to be running some drop-in sessions for MPs to meet with youth ambassadors to kind of promote the bill. It's all going to be set up by the Today for Tomorrow campaign, and it will be really easy for MPs get involved in that. So that's something that you as a constituent could ask your MP to do, and it would be quite an easy commitment from them. We'll make sure that some information about that gets sent round when they have it already, but it's an idea of what they could do. And then also, if your MP seems like they might be around a 3, maybe a 4, like quite on board with what you're saying, then you could ask them to be a panelist in a webinar. You could ask them to come to an online meeting of a group that you organise, a discussion, and that can be really nice for them. They can quite like that because it can be some quite good PR for them, and it can also give them more of an insight into what's going on in their constituency and what people care about. It's worth just saying at this point though, that it depends on your MP, and we can help you with making this decision, but you might decide that talking about the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill is not quite right for your MP at this time. It doesn't mean that you never get them to talk about it or you never bring it up with them, but if your MP is really kind of at the polar opposite of the political spectrum from you, for example, you might start with a conversation that leads you to building up to talking about this. Your first meeting with your MP doesn't always have to be like straight in with your big ask. You might think that it's smarter to build up to that engagement. And then I'll just quickly say that you as a constituent hold quite a lot of power with your MP. So there's lots of ways you can motivate your MP, and it's important that you don't go into the meeting feeling like you're just asking for something from them. You can also provide them with something, and that might be an improved understanding of their community, of their constituency. It might be providing them a mandate to act on something that they already agree with. Oftentimes it's publicity and good PR, but oftentimes as well there'll be co-benefits of what you're asking your MP to do that they haven't necessarily associated with climate change or with, for example, the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill. So things like not everyone realises the healthcare benefits, the benefits to local economies of climate change related policies, and you can kind of highlight those to your MP. And also showing them that they can leave this legacy of public service can be really motivating for some MPs. So it's worth thinking about how does what you're asking your MP to do, how can you motivate your MP to commit? I'm going to hand back over to Helena.
Yes. Thanks, Lizzie. So I'm now going to take us through the final stage in our approach, and that is preparing for your meeting and your conversation with your MP. So before I get into it, just to mention that this five-point scale that Lizzie has been talking us through, we tend to say that in one engagement with your MP, you can expect to move your MP 1 or maybe 2 places along that scale. So perhaps it's self-explanatory, but you can't really expect to make a 1 become a 5 in one meeting. So that's just important to bear in mind with what you expect from the meeting you have with your MP. So I'm going to share 3 techniques with you now, conversation techniques that will hopefully be helpful for you in preparing for your meeting and in having a really engaging and productive conversation with your MP. So the first technique is assert, and this is all about introducing your topic and what it is you want to talk about with your MP in that meeting. So we suggest that in advance of your meeting, you take a few minutes to come up with this introduction. And you can use this purpose hook map method to do that. So, oh, sorry if you can hear the phone ringing in the background. The purpose is the kind of elevator pitch of exactly what you want to discuss in that meeting. So you want it to be really short, like 20 to 30 seconds. Here the example is, I would like to discuss the issue of air quality in our local area. So really simple, straightforward, the MP knows exactly what you're going to be talking about. Then you could move on to the hook. So this is the thing that your MP gets some co-benefit out of as well. So what is it about the topic you're talking to your MP about that should interest them? Perhaps it's the connection to the constituency itself and that constituency mandate that Lizzie was talking about before, or perhaps there's a good kind of PR opportunity, or you can kind of come up with something from those motivations Lizzie was just talking about. So here, I'm concerned that poor air quality in this area increases the risk of COVID-19 and other health issues for people in our community. And then the final part is the map. And this is mapping out, setting out how you'd like your conversation to go. So what is it that you are actually asking your MP to take action on? And this is really helpful because if you find yourself getting off track during the meeting, it's something you can refer back to, so the MP knows from the start exactly what it is that you're going to want to talk to them about. So that is the first technique. The second is assure. So this is for sort of throughout your conversation with your MP, things to be considering whilst you are having a meeting with them. We call it tactical empathy, not because it's fake empathy, but because as I was talking about right at the start about nonviolent communication, this is sort of empathy and recognizing the humanity in the other person is sort of the foundation of all of these things that we're talking about today. So you can think about your tone and make sure that you are being friendly, and over a Zoom call, I think mirroring body language is a little bit more difficult to do, but perhaps if you ever have a meeting with your MP in person, your body language is something to consider as well. Active listening, so making sure that you ask questions that show that you are listening. So things like asking them to clarify what a word or something they refer to means, or saying things like, I hear you, I see that from your perspective. Those sorts of phrases show that you are actively listening to them. And finally, breaking down barriers. This is, I think, a technique that takes some courage to use, but can be really beneficial if you are having a meeting that you're finding really difficult, or you feel like you're really coming up against a lot of barriers with your MP. It's actually from mindfulness, and the idea is that you basically name out loud and affirm out loud what it is you're feeling. So you might be finding that you're feeling really frustrated, or you could just say something like, I'm actually finding this conversation quite difficult because I feel like we're going round in circles, or something like that, to kind of label what it is you're feeling. And that can help to sort of dispel that and mean that you're being honest with your MP, and that helps build that relationship and rapport. The final technique is 3 levels of questioning. So again, this is one that you probably would be using throughout your meeting. So you want to be building on each level. So we start at level 1 with facts and data questions. So finding out who provides the budget for this bill, or what question was asked at which time. Very sort of basic data collecting. And then once you've done some of that, you can ask some questions about the meaning and impact of those things. So why was that decision made, and who will be affected by it? And then finally, level 3, which is what you're really aiming for, is the values and attitudes questions of finding out how your MP feels about an issue. And we suggest doing this 3 levels of questioning because ultimately going straight in with some level 3, quite probing questions about your MP's values is perhaps a little affronting. So it helps to build up to that. Great. So that was a very whistle-stop tour of some techniques. This is just to kind of show you how they would fit into the conversation. So the introduction being the first one, the purpose, hook and map. The listening stage of your conversation being using that tactical empathy, those active listening skills, and really, and probably the questioning as well, the 3 levels of questioning, seeing how your MP feels about the issue, trying to work out how to use that and where to go from there. And then finally, at the end of your meeting, you want to be in the visioning stage, which sounds very fancy, but is ultimately just working out where you go from there. So making sure that you leave your meeting with a clear, all of you being very clear about what you're each doing after the meeting. So what is the action point that your MP has agreed to do, and what you can then make sure you follow up with them on after the meeting. Great. So we're gonna, well, I would imagine most of the meetings that you have as a result of trying to engage with your MP on this bill and perhaps other climate issues will be virtual. I think we're going to be doing virtual meetings for many more months at this point. So just some top tips quickly for a virtual meeting. Think about who is hosting, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's on Teams. Your MP's office will often create the link for the call for you, so that might take away some of that question. But also if it's a group of you, perhaps think about which one of you is going to be, might host the meeting and kind of make sure everyone has a chance to speak. Secondly, think about your setting. I think we're all probably quite used to, at this point, to using Zoom, but the obvious things like making sure you're somewhere you can hear and perhaps have headphones to block out noise. But also don't worry about this too much, because I think MPs and everyone understand that when everyone's at home with their children and trying to do all this, as well as juggling other things, then they're not going to be hugely concerned if there's a bit of noise in the background. And yeah, check the timings, make sure you know when you're meeting. And another thing to mention that's not on this slide actually is that us at Hope for the Future can attend a meeting with you. We're very happy to support you in doing that. So that might be us facilitating the meeting or just joining you for some moral support. So do let us know if that would be helpful when you have a meeting set up. And finally, make sure you follow up after the meeting. So email your MP in the days after your meeting, just to reiterate the things that you agreed that they would do, and make sure they know that you're waiting for them to do those things, and also to thank them for meeting with you. I'm going to pass back to Lizzie for this final bit.
Yeah, so we've just put this slide up really as a kind of opener into what we can do to help you with this process, and we really do see it as a process. Not many people that we work with only meet with their MP once or only have one engagement with their MP, so it can take some time, and that's why we're here to support you, because it can feel like a lot of work, and we want to take some of that burden off you, really. So when you're setting up a meeting with your MP, we can help with that. We can help with proofreading your letters. We have a template letter about the Wellbeing of Future Generations bill that I'll pop in the link, and will also be in the follow-up to this training. As Helena said, we can be there in the meeting with you. We can help you run like another more sort of informal version of this training with your group, so that you can work through some of those ideas of what you want to talk about. We can obviously provide some of this research with the tailored lobbying strategies to help you find out what exactly your MP might be able to do. And we can also help you with planning and support you with running events that you might want to invite your MP to, for example. So really, this is a kind of starting block, if you like, and if you're interested, definitely get in touch with us and we can kind of take it from there based on what you've done already and what you would like to do next. I think we're going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to answer some questions now. So Helena, if you don't mind, yeah, that's great, thanks. I'm going to pop some links in the chat as well. We already got one question that's come in, so I'll just put these links up in the chat, hopefully. We've got one question that's come in and I'm hoping Helena might help me answer. So this person has said, one thing I have found difficult in having a Labour MP is that she agrees with everything we say about climate change and pledged to vote in Parliament in line with climate change, but has little power to actually do anything given she is in the opposition party. What should we be asking for when lobbying an MP like this?
Yeah, yes, it's a difficult position to be in as an MP. I can imagine it can be frustrating for her probably. But the things that we would recommend in that situation would be asking her to submit written questions or oral questions in debates that are really kind of scrutinizing the government on the climate topic. So more specifically, obviously, with certain topics, so it might be in the environment bill debates or some community energy debate, those sorts of things, really asking her to ask very specific questions to certain ministers and secretaries of state. And we can definitely help you with coming up with what those specific questions to ask her to ask should be. But yeah, it's, I think, more about trying to get your MP to be a really active voice of scrutiny of the government in that situation. Yeah, Lizzie, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I think it's a great answer. I think it's also worth bearing in mind that not all the lobbying that you might do might have a really obvious outcome, and sometimes it might feel that like, oh, my MP can't really do anything, but they still represent you, so it's still worth telling them what you want because they're your MP, and they often, a lot of the influence that they have within Parliament kind of goes on behind closed doors. So making sure that they know what you care about and encouraging them to like actively promote that within Parliament can be really effective. It might just not have like very obvious outcomes of like this bill got passed, or if that makes sense. It's quite a frustrating feeling, but you if you keep going with it, it can bear fruit eventually. And I think that's going to be one thing with this bill that's quite important, is having that kind of those conversations going on around the bill that aren't necessarily obvious to us what concrete actions going on, just making sure that your MP is aware of it, is talking about it, is going to events that are talking about it as well. And we've got one more question that's come in, and I think I might know who this is from. I'll read it out. Our MP is a government minister, so this is kind of like the opposite side of the coin. We'd love to ask them to join the APPG group for the Future Generations Bill, but they don't seem to be keen on working cross-party on other subjects. Is it worth pursuing this as an aim? So I'm guessing from this, I think I've understood this question, like they're not keen on working cross-party on other things you've raised, and so is it worth pursuing it for this particular APPG? Helena, I don't know if you have an opinion on this.
I think it's worth an ask, in the sense that perhaps you could find a way to frame it that focuses more on what we've been talking about with co-benefits rather than the cross-party aspect. Perhaps you could frame it more in a find a way to show them that's sort of not more important, but just less focus on the cross-party part, more focus on the benefits for their constituents part, if that makes sense. I think in them being a minister, that does probably add some more complication, as we mentioned earlier, with ministers really having to stick to their party line on things. And so, yeah, I think I would say that it is definitely worth pursuing it, but perhaps you might want to also think of be aware that they might say no, and think of some other asks that you could put to them instead, if they do say no. Marta, do you have something to add?
Yeah, if I may add here, the thing that, like, when we talk, because we are in contact with Today for Tomorrow campaign, which actually is driving the whole thing, and they're quite honest that the best case scenario would be if it was the government who came up with a similar bill. So maybe that is also one of the topics of the conversation. Like, you know, we all have, you know, the best intentions when it comes to our children, grandchildren, and no matter what the colors, political colors, you know, we are, I think everyone has those best intentions and wants to leave that kind of a legacy and, you know, for the future, especially if you're a politician. So I would say that this could be, yeah, maybe if not joining the cross-parliamentary group, how about just lobbying your own party and your own government to come up with a bill that actually protects the future people in the same way as this one does, or yeah, that would be my suggestion as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, I think we'll wrap up the questions there. I know, Marta, I think you wanted to say a few words before the end.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a little bit of promotion. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining and taking, you know, your time, lunchtime break on Friday to listen to this valuable training. I hope you have found it quite interesting and definitely, you know, you're gonna apply some of the solutions in your lobbying work. I would just like to say to invite you all to join our campaign, basically, and to go to our website. I've posted a link, but I'm sure Lizzie will send we'll send it in an email after the webinar. There's lots of information on the website, what you can do as a you know, as a parent, a carer, as someone who cares about the future, what are the next steps. But basically, you're going to find a template letter there as well that you can use to write to your MP, asking them for a meeting, because as we know, the meeting is the most efficient way to lobby your MP. So we all encourage you to write to your MP and then reach out to Hope for the Future to create the strategy for the meeting and to have that meeting ahead of the 22nd of January. And the last thing is just to follow us either on social media. We're on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, or subscribe to our newsletter, because this is, as I said, this bill is not, you know, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of campaigning to hopefully eventually have it you know, enshrined in the UK law. So it's just the beginning, this campaign. We're going to do much more, and we're in touch with Today for Tomorrow campaign, and we'll be working with them. So it's important to basically stay in touch, and these are the best way to do this. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Great. Well, yeah, thank you very much for having us as well. It's really nice to connect with some new networks, and hopefully lots of you will be in touch. You'll get a follow-up email from this webinar, and also hopefully when it closes, there there'll be a survey. You can leave your details there if you'd like us to get in touch with you instead. So yeah, so thank you everyone for attending today, and we'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.